Hi, and welcome to Fawns & Porter's Freeform Block of the Month featuring Paintbrush Studios fabrics. Isn't it gorgeous? I'm going to help you through every step of the way. I'm your host, Jenny K. Parks. If you want to know more about me, you can check out my website, YouTube, and on Facebook, Jenny K. Quilts. All right, let's get started. In this first episode, we are going to make a compass block number 1 and an uneven 9 patch. So let's jump in here. I wanted to cover a few basics here. First of all, let me show you this. This is my first attempt. I like to do a practice block, especially when I'm making up something big like this, and to show, I want to do a practice block so I better understand. And I want you to take a really good look at this block, my version of compass block number 1. You notice right here, it's not even. It's not. I didn't match up right there. And there's a lot of little things that I learned to fix along the way. And I show you this because I want to encourage you. I say that every project is a learning project. Every quilt has something to teach you that you didn't know before, some skill to perfect, something new to learn. So look at this project in that same way. There's going to be a lot to learn and a lot that we can master. Also, people sew in different ways, different styles of sewing. And by that I mean how they move the fabric around and what they do. Machines handle fabric differently. Sewing machines work differently. So I'm going to share a lot of techniques that worked for me, and I encourage you to try different methods, to try the different ways and see what's going to work best for you, your sewing style, and for your machine. See, there's a picture of it underneath too. I mean, I did well on some things, but not so great on others. So I'm just showing you that to kind of say, we're in the same boat, but I learned a lot of tricks through this, and I'm going to show them all to you. Okay. So the first thing that I really want to talk about too, because we're going to be doing curved piecing, I want to talk about what I call starchy goodness, okay? Here's 2 extra pieces that I had cut from another block, and I want to show you the difference. This one has not been starched. You see, I kind of just put it over my hand, and it just lays there on my hand. This one has been starched. Look at that. This is as starchy as I want you to get it when you're working with it, because we're working with curved piecing. We want to maneuver around these curves, but we don't want to stretch them out of shape. We don't want to distort the curve, right, and ruin it. We want to keep that curve in the shape. So starching, that is my first tip to you. You want starchy goodness. So you can use a starch alternative if you want to. There are several of them out there. This is one, but I'll share with you my favorite thing that I like to use. It is water, and I don't mess around. I got a big spray bottle, and Faultless spray starch. This is my favorite brand. Personally, it works the best for me. Now, a trick that a lot of people don't realize about starch is that it works better when it's wet. So if you spritz the fabric really well with the water, and then you spray the starch on there, you let it dry a little bit, but while it's still damp, you press, then you're going to get these kind of results. I mean, it's almost so the fabric can walk over to the table with you. All right, here I come. We're going to sew together. And it works so much better that way when it's nice, when you've achieved nice starchy goodness. Okay, so that's my first tip there for you. You'll be much more successful if it's starched. All right, so first we're going to start with compass block number 1, and we need to cut out using templates. Templates, you can get templates for the kit. And the first one we're going to start with is our A template. You cut the fabric like the pattern says. And here's a template A. Now, I like on my templates, even though they're nice and thick, which I really appreciate that, but I also put double-sided Scotch tape on the back. And it makes it sticky so that when I'm moving it around the fabric, it doesn't shift when I'm cutting, okay? I think that's really key to doing this and getting accurate lines here. So I'm going to line this fella up. And I've cut according to the measurements in the pattern. I like to do it so I can trim off just a little bit along this edges. Oh, I also like to use this little cutter for that. The smaller size, I think it works much better, and I'll show you why. And I'll show you this other trick that I had too. This rotating mat, perfect. It's so helpful when you're doing this. Unless you have a corner that you're cutting on and you can maneuver yourself, it's nice to be able to just maneuver your block, your fabric. So I cut here, and I go slowly through that part and cut away. And I'm going to turn it around again. And I'm going to cut slowly along here. And I say slowly because my hands are so close to what's happening with the cutting there. I don't want it to get in the way. All right. So there's A. I'm going to make sure that was all taken off. And I make sure it's all cut out all around it before I remove the fabric. If this gets linty, you can just peel off that tape and put a new set on, but a really invaluable trick there. Okay, so we've got this piece. And the next one we need is B. There's B. You know, I probably, yeah, okay. Now I don't like to line it up exactly on the edge. I'm okay with trimming just a little bit off to make sure I've got a nice straight edge. The curves are going to be enough of an issue. I don't want my straight edges to be any problem at all. Now we're going to get this curve, and again, nice and slowly. Oop. I felt it hiccup there. Back around here to this side. Make sure all that's coming off. Beautiful. A, B, and then the next one is C. In a corner here, and since you already have, I mean, I wouldn't really need to cut this on a rotating mat, but since I already have it out, and it is pretty convenient. All right, I'll line it up on there. Oh, didn't quite get the edge there. Ball it up and rotate around. Cut that part off. And get this. Now, assuming you would be cutting several in a row, so then I get to my next one, I lay the template down and just continue switching it around as I go through the whole length. All right, so there's our pieces. Close my cutter. Now, if you're like me, the first time you had to piece with a curve, you're thinking, these two are not going to go together. But you also have to remember you have the 1/4 inch seam allowance to account for, and it will work. All right, so a couple tricks that I figured out while I was doing this that were very helpful for me. One is you can put a little mark right there in the middle. I like to just fold the piece like so. Whoop. And I kind of fold a little, I kind of press a little fold in there. I don't want to press it with the iron. I just don't want to have that extra thing that I have to press out. And usually because I'm sitting down here and I don't want it to go up to my iron, but that's a little shortcut. Then I'll fold this in half. And do the same thing there. And what we're going to want is for those to match up. That tells you when you're halfway there. Now what we're basically going to do is we're going to line it up here, and then we're going to have to maneuver as we sew. But I'm going to do this, I'm going to put this side down, and this side is going to be the one that's on top. So, and I'm going to tell you what I'm doing here because sometimes it's a little hard to see under the machine, but I want you to kind of understand. I'm going to line it up here, and I'm going to put my needle down just in there using a 1/4 inch foot. So I keep that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to rotate this so we start to line up along there. And as we go along, I'm going to continue to rotate this one that's on the top. When we get to the creases, I'm going to make sure those match and then continue to rotate all the way down to the end. Now it looks like, as I'm doing it here, like it's not going to fit, but I did it, so trust me, we can do it. It's going to fit. All right, let me start sewing. And then I'm going to rotate the fabric so it matches up. You know what? Okay. A little bit off there, but that's all right. And you just start sewing nice and slow. This is not one of those speedy quilts. You just want to take it nice and slowly. I take a few stitches and adjust. Take a few and adjust. Now if you want to, where I made those creases, you could certainly draw a mark on there if that's easier for you to see, if that makes more sense for you. All right, so I can kind of see it and I can feel where both of those are. If you want to mark them also with a pencil or something like that so that you can see them, feel free to do that. This one, this way works for me pretty well. I've gotten to that point. Keep lining up on the seam allowance, on the edge of the presser foot. And then as I get towards the end here, I'm going to kind of hold things together with my finger. You can use a tweezers or a stiletto, whatever works for you there. And then continue going all the way off the end. All right, so come over here and we're going to press it. I like to press towards the top. I think these shapes look to me like an ice cream cone. So I like to press towards the ice cream and away from the cone. All right. So let's look at this closely here before I move on. This is the part that I started on. So I got that just right. This one, it's tricky to get that ending just right. I am pretty close, and putting it together, it's not going to matter. It's one of those things that if you're within that 1/4 inch seam allowance, it's going to be okay, all right? So don't worry about that too much. All right, so now we have our next piece here, and we want to put it together like so. It's going to go right there. That's where C is going to go. And I like to, when I'm doing this, I like to sew with the curved piecing section, curved pieced unit on top. I like to see that. I think it gives me a better clue of what's happening and where and why it's happening. And I think it gives me a little bit better control. So I'm going to stitch this on and then we'll press it. And that's just a nice straight line. Now what I would suggest when you're doing your curved piecing, do all the curved piecing that you can together, even in one sitting, but certainly don't switch to do something else, because I think that the more you do it, the more you can repeat what you're doing, the better you're going to be at it, the more skills you develop with it. All right. I think at this point I press away from the curve. I found that to be the best for me, to press away from the curved portion. So there we pressed away. And here is the rest of the block to join it to. So here's this segment here, and I need to join those two together. See how the whole block would be assembled like this. So I'm going to put these together for you. Now we need to trim off dog-eared parts here. they're just going to clutter up what's on the inside. They're just going to clutter up the intersection, and we want that to be nice and clean. We don't want any surprising bumps when you try to quilt it right in the middle of each one. All right, so let's put these together. And again, since I like to sew it with the curved portion on top, I'm going to flip it over and sew it in this direction. Now, to make everything meet, this is one important part that we need to be aware of. See, since I've pressed away from the curve each time, these two seams can snuggle into each other. And they can snuggle in, and I can feel that right there. I can feel that there's not a bump and that they mesh beautifully. So we can just take that there. You can pin that if you want to. I have come across on occasion, I'll probably do it throughout this series, is that if I can't get these little fellas to match, I'll put some glue stick on there. But right now, they're lining up beautifully. I'm not worried. Let's sew it. All right, and I also make sure I kind of line it up as I go along, just to make sure, instead of pinning. I'm kind of the anti-pinner. My grandma would have pinned everything 3 or 4 times, and I say a pin if necessary, pin if you're worried about it, pin if you can't get it to match, but otherwise I don't like to do it. All right, let's press this section. Now here, I remember I talked about pressing away from the curve, but we have curves curves all around. So what I decided to do, especially for these parts, the second time I put them together. So when I assemble these units, I'm going to press it open. And usually I don't. You know me, I'm not a fussy sewer. I'm not really particular about things, but this will really cut down on the bulk. I believe there's a compelling reason to press it like this. I think that works a lot better. I think you'd be happier with the finished result. I'm not pressing all of them open because I don't think you need to. And I think pressing everything open makes it unstable, makes the whole thing kind of unstable. All right, now we need to put these two together. So as I'm looking at it here, what we want is for these points to match. We want those to meet as best we possibly can. So there's a few techniques. I think this time around, I'm going to show you how I pin it to make them fit together. And you can kind of feel it in there. You can feel where things are. Let's pull it back, and we can kind of look where we want those to meet. Right there, we want it to match with right there, really close and tiny. So I'm going to take a pin. I know I just talked about not pinning. Here's where I pin. I'm going to take a pin, and I'm going to put it right through that X. See, that X marks our spot. That's exactly where the fabrics meet. So I'm going to put it right through that X, and then I'm going to go through the other X, right there. And I'm going to get those together. The pin is nice and straight. It's not crooked, right? If it was lined up like this, it wouldn't line up well. So it's nice and straight there. And then I'm going to get out my handy friend, Captain Glue Stick, and glue those together. So let me show you this one more time. I want you to be able to get a good view. I fold that back, right? I've held it really securely in place. I fold it back, and I just put a little glue stick in the seam allowances. Not a lot, just a little bit to secure it. Say, hey, I mean business. Here's where you're going to stay. And this is just water-soluble, washable glue stick. I love it. It's one of my go-to notions, must have in my sewing basket. All right. So I'm going to line this up, and here I can't see the point at the top here, exactly where to match that, but it's going to be all right. We're going to do fine. And I pull it and adjust a little bit as I go along. I don't want to disrupt my, my point that I've created here. And then as I'm stitching, I want to stitch right over that X that I've made with my sewing lines, right over the X. Then before I get too far down here, I want to make sure this end lines up. Get that really nice. All right, let's see how I did. At this point too, I'm going to press this. I do like to sort of preheat my seams. I think especially with this where you want to persuade the fabric to go in a particular direction, you need to be really persuasive and heat it up a little bit. So I'll open up this very center part because we're going to press this seam open as well. All right, we've got that open. So I'm going to press this seam open again. Again, pressing after I've joined the units. This will decrease the bulk that you end up with in the middle. And also I think, especially with curved piecing, pressing to one side or the other can distort the curve on the top. How you press it underneath can make a difference on that curve. And you know, we worked hard to get this curve. I don't want to make it look any different. Beautiful. All right. There we go. Oh, look. Lovely. All right. So this is compass block number 1. Again, I suggest that you do each part of the unit one after another before you go on to another step. I think that helps to cement in your mind, and it helps for you to get a better, more consistent result. Okay, so now our next thing that we need to tackle is our uneven 9 patch. And this is a pretty basic patch, so I'm just going to kind of walk you through it. We have several blocks. You have to be careful on this one because if you turn this way, well, no, that'll work that way, but you can't mismatch. You just have to watch where you are on each one. Okay, see why you have to be careful? It gets a little bit confusing, but I like to lay out the block so you can see it before you start to sew. I think that is so important. Just picking up two and having them go together without having a layout of how it's going to look, that's really, it can get really confusing. I also like to sew with my pattern right up here on the wall beside me so I can turn and glance. Okay, I got it, and keep going along like that. So this, you could also use strips, do this in strips and cut them apart, but this is the way that it's kind of a more traditional way. This is also a great way for scraps, and think about a lot of scrap possibilities with this that you could come up with later, just a few things and putting some scrap stuff together. Really cute, really good addition to this particular quilt. So let me show you kind of how this is all going to go together. Our next 3. Our middle and our sides. So you would sew these together and sew that, and then you just sew them together, assembly like a regular old 9 patch. You want to be careful to match these intersections here and choose one direction to press. Here I've pressed all towards the green, which is probably a better choice because this is lighter than that. Some of the colors that we're going to be working with throughout this, the colors are going to be so close, it's not really going to make a difference. So just pick one direction and stick with it. So when you sew it together along here, you just make sure that those line up, that they feel nice and flat to each other. If you're having trouble with it, again, you can use pins and glue stick to make it all go together. All right, so our next episode, we're going to cover compass block number 2, and I've got a lot of good tricks for you. I would encourage you to read over the pattern before you watch the videos so that you know what your questions are, so you can be sure to get the answers to those questions. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time. This episode of Freeform Block of the Month is brought to you by Paintbrush Studios, fabrics for your masterpiece.